This is the first of the hotspots, and it's called a hotspot because it's meant to be generating sort of emotion and enthusiasm and obviously excitement and interest. Basically, 5 people. We're going to look at the future. I personally mistrust futurology extremely. I don't believe it. But when you've got people who are actually making the future, it then becomes worthwhile. And we've got 5 people here who I think are, in very, very different ways. So we're just going to go down the line, down the sausage factory, as it were, and go bang, 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 and they're going to make a pitch and enthuse all of you, I hope, about the way the future's going. Let me introduce people. On the far end of the stage, as far from me as you can get, Sophie Vandebroek, who's the Chief Technical Officer of Xerox and the President of the Xerox Innovation Group. Nova Spivack, CEO and founder of Twine.com, and in 1994, if I'm right, the co-founder of EarthWeb. So you've been in this thing right from the beginning. Mary Branscombe's a journalist from Britain. Troy Cross is the head of global partnership at Vlingo.
Vlingo.
Right. Voice recognition. And Bright, the aptly named Bright Simmons, or Simons? Simmons is from Ghana, and he's the coordinator of the mPedigree network and IMANI-Ghana. And I know, because I talked to him last night, he's got some amazing things to say, but I'm going to come to him last. Sophie, first of all, the impossible question. When we look at the year unfolding and maybe the 5 years unfolding, what's going to jump out at us? What are we not seeing now that you think is going to be there, particularly in your field?
Okay, great. And my field is the R at Xerox. So I lead research around the world. And so part of my job is to constantly look into the future, come up with scenarios, because the future is obviously very difficult to predict. The next 5 years to me is actually short term, because most of the products and services that we're developing, I mean, we look much further out. Let's say currently we're looking at 2020 and beyond, in addition to, of course, having the near term little under control. But so you look at the different trends, and we're looking at globalization, information explosion, knowledge work of the future, climate change. And out of all these trends, I mean, I would say the most important invention of the last 100 years or 50 years was, of course, the microchip, because that is really at the core of all of the systems in the world today, whether it's your power systems or medical devices or the internet, et cetera. I think one of the key trends we see is this trend of information explosion, content explosion. For example, in 2007, 281 exabytes is 10 to the 18 of data and information was created and shared on the internet. That is, in fact, 5 million times all the information ever written in all the books in the history of the world, created in just 1 year. And it will continue to explode, a zettabyte in 2010, and significantly more in the future. So a key thing is, through this explosion and collaboration, of course, with Moore's Law, that in the next 10 years, the processing power of devices are going to be 1,000 times better. So you will see sensors and devices embedded everywhere, I mean, in buildings, in infrastructures, in humans, to improve life and to really help us. But all of this data is going to be so difficult for people to use in a simple way. So within Xerox, in our different labs, we do a lot of natural language processing and a lot of technologies that will help people and companies and countries much more easily manage the information and really be much more aware of what you need, when you need it. And so computers becoming very smart, right? I mean, for example, systems and machines will be able to access all the information the internet ever created and, in fact, be able to extract meaning out of that. I mean, you can envision negotiating or having a discussion with a system to understand, to more quickly solve legal cases, or to more quickly invent new medicines, et cetera. So this whole notion of information explosion and how do you get to the content you need, and those of us that can really help with simple tools that are easy to use to give people quick access to this information and help make business decisions is really what a lot is all about.
Are we looking at radical changes? Of course, you can't see the most radical changes by definition, but do you think we are looking at radical changes? If the problem is so much information that we can't make sense of it, Are we looking at radical changes in that crucial question of how we make sense of a massive information?
I think there are many, many technologies that I see emerging, both in Xerox's labs, but in labs around the world, to significantly, for example, in litigation right now, there are e-discovery tools where people can quickly look at information, but still lawyers or lawyers' aides look at pages at a time. There is now software technologies that can quickly categorize. Out of these 10 million documents, here are the million that are really relevant, and within that finding facts, et cetera. I think a lot of these technologies are at the verge of becoming commercialized today. So to me, that's actually the shorter term. The other key trend is mass customization. Everything will be personalized. I mean, to the individual, whether it's the packaging on the bottle, as Mark Hurd said, or whether it is your news, your books, your photo albums, the content you need to go through the day, and much more will be automated and done by smart devices.
Will we ever get a photocopier that you don't fix by going like that?
We don't fix them anymore. We are working, of course, on systems that are self-healing. I mean, climate change is also big, so systems that have significantly less waste, et cetera. But the goal is that the printing systems and multifunction devices are all self-healing. And nanotechnology is really great in that area.
Actually, there is, I mean, it was a flippant question, but there is a serious point to it. Are we in danger of getting so clever that we neglect the basic technology, the simple things? And sometimes the simple things are the important things, like changing a cartridge.
Yeah. So you have to make all the systems very, very simple to use. And again, I'm now in the shorter term, but last week we launched a product called Color Cube that is really using dry inks. It's like puzzle pieces. One of our commercials has a 2-year-old kid putting ink in there. So there are no cartridges. There is no waste. So you have to constantly, we do a lot of work with anthropologists, user interface experts to make it significantly simple. But yes, many, many systems today are way too difficult to use for the majority of the people around the globe.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Nova, cast your eyes forward as far as you care to.
Okay, can you hear me? So if there was one insight that I would want to leave you all with today, it's not actually about the future, it's about the present. Because actually the present is changing very quickly right now. And in particular, there's a shift going on from what we thought of as the web to something else. And I call that the stream. So I think the stream is actually the next evolution of the web. It's what's coming after the web. And if we look at history here, the web is a recent phenomenon. There was the internet, the web didn't exist. Then we got, in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee made his proposal to CERN, and we got the web. So the first decade of the web was 89 to 99. The second decade was 99 to 2009. Actually, March of 2009, the third decade began. The second decade was actually about the social networks, primarily, the social web. So we went from webs to networks, and now we're going to streams. So there are some differences between this world we're going into and the web of the past. In particular, websites were mainly actually static things. They didn't change that fast. You could actually make a valuable website that never changed at all. It could be a great collection of resources that never changed, and it would be valuable. But in a stream, the change is what's most important. It's the fact that it changes that makes it valuable. If it doesn't change, it's not useful. Now, we're seeing this happen in particular in places like Twitter, in RSS feeds, in the increasing pace of data being pumped through APIs. We're moving towards a real-time web, and that's on every level, at the software level, at the content level, and especially at the user interface level with services like Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. IM is another example. So what characterizes a stream? What makes a stream or the stream different? One is change. We're moving to a web where change is more important than structure. It's more important than even content. It's just the change itself is what people want. Secondly, interface independence. In the world of the web, we all designed user interfaces, put a lot of effort into making websites. Actually, in this new world of the stream, your data is completely separate and separable from your user interface. And in fact, it will be consumed in lots of places that you don't control. In fact, control of the interface is moving from the provider to the consumer. So consumers will be able to control how they look at your content in whatever tool they want, on their phone, on their desktop, in various other services. So you have to stop thinking so much about user interface and think about the quality of your data and how to embed your brand, your value, your voice actually into the data that's getting syndicated. The third piece is a change from hyperlinks to conversations. So in the first and second decades of the web, hyperlinks were important. They were important to SEOing your content. They were important to the structure. Now what we're seeing is hyperlinks are becoming a little less important, and what's mattering more is the fact that people are commenting, they're replying, and they're forwarding your content to others. Now in the Twitter world, there's some special terms for this, but the point is content distribution, content discovery is shifting from links to conversation. It's becoming increasingly social and increasingly intertwined, so to speak. And so in this new world, if your company isn't using Twitter, doesn't know about Twitter, you've got to learn. It's absolutely critical to your business. You've got to be on top of it 24/7. And Twitter's not the only service like this. Facebook and other real-time services. In fact, you'll see many of us who are making websites going real-time in the next year or two. It's all going to move to this real-time kind of interface. So it's very, very critical that you jump on that. The other big change is that the effect this is having is it's making the now shorter. The now is the unit of change. So it used to be that the now on the web was about a week at first, then it was moved down to about a day. That is, sites would update maybe every day, then to an hour. And now what we've got is it's happening literally every second. So if you're not actually watching Twitter continuously, somebody might say something about your brand, and pretty soon 1 million people have picked that up and are forwarding it around to their friends. It can happen in the space of minutes. So in this world, the now is extremely compressed. It means that we're shifting to a focus on the present rather than a focus on the past. Google and the web that we were in was actually all about the past. Google indexes the past, and the recent past as well as the long-term past. You can think of it as our long-term memory. Now we're moving into a short-term memory space where all the activity, innovation, and really the important stuff, the surface area, the edge, if you will, of what's going on is right there in the last few minutes. And you have to actually be interacting and participating in those last few minutes if you want to shape change. So if you don't do that, you're just sort of a has-been. You're going to miss out. You're going to be living in the past. And everybody else, your customers, the press, they're living in the present.
I mean, it begs a question. How does it change us as people if we have to be,
we
kind of live in another world, don't we?
It's pretty much the decline of Western civilization, Yeah.
Well, that's okay then. Okay.
What are you doing today is the question Twitter asks. And it's a really mundane, inane question. And, unfortunately, now we have to pay attention to this. But, this is where we're headed. It's just the reality we're in. What it means for all of us is basically you cannot afford to be offline if you're in any kind of position of managing a brand, managing a company. You just can't be offline. And that means things like GoGo Wireless have absolutely made a huge difference in my life because I can be online on a plane. You need things like this, and if you have anything like that in the pipeline, get it out there because it's critical.
I can see that that's clearly true for companies and organizations. Is there a danger, or a hope rather, of a world though for people where we simply say, this technology, I don't want to keep up. Put it over there.
Well, actually,
Twitter away, I don't want to know.
This is what's actually going to happen. It's already happening. Never in history has there been such a gap between the tools that generations are using. Currently living generations are using completely different mediums. So you've got kids using game consoles that none of us really even know how to use. Then you've got us using the web, email, and a bunch of technologies that our grandparents don't use. And there are 3 generations alive today using different mediums. And there's a huge gap. It's a problem in education because even teachers and students aren't using the same tools. It's certainly a problem in society. This is going to just be the problem, and it's not going to get fixed for a generation or 2. So it is a problem. It's going to change things. But for consumers, I will say, the place to look at is, one is the age gap. There's going to be different technologies for different age groups, and the other is demographic, because not everybody can afford to stay current with these technologies. And so there's another big issue around a demographic gap.
Thank you very much. Mary, we know that newspapers are dead. We know that everybody under 30 thinks that anything on the web is free. We know that journalists are expensive. So what's the future of news?
I feel quite comfortable sitting between Sophie and coming after Mark and saying print isn't dead. There was a recent report from PricewaterhouseCoopers Waterhouse talking about the newspaper industry. Newspapers still make the majority of their revenue from print. But interestingly, as Mark was saying, newspapers also have the majority of their costs in print.
Can you hear at the back, by the way? Can everybody hear? Just be aware, if you lean to your left when you talk, they can hear. If you lean to your right, be very rude. Don't look at me when you talk. Lean to your left because the microphone is picking you up then.
Is that better?
Yeah.
So PricewaterhouseCoopers has recently done a big survey of the newspaper industry, and they're saying newspapers still make their money from print, but the thing that still costs them hugely is the paper handling. Journalists are expensive, but paper is more expensive. And the logistics are bad, but the paper costs. So getting the printing out in terms of the developments that happen is one way that it'll go. Devices changing is the other way that it will go. Kindle has had an impact on print books to a certain extent. It hasn't touched magazines and newspapers yet because it hasn't directed towards that market. You have, Apple is buying 7-inch touchscreens at the moment, and I'm not sure I believe in a 7-inch iPhone coming through. I know that Apple isn't going to just do a standard netbook. If Apple does something that looks similar to a Kindle, that targets that reading experience, or if we get some of the e-paper, e-ink coming through, HP has a spin-off that's looking at printing e-ink. Instead of going onto a glass sheet, you go onto a plastic sheet. You get to a tenth, a hundredth of the cost of doing an LCD screen. You start to get something where you can say, I've got a real digital paper coming through here that I can treat as a mix between digital and paper. And the other trend that comes through is, everyone says content is free. Everyone says I'm not going to pay for news. But the consumers do say, I'm going to pay for the niche content that I want, the specialized content that is good for me. And yes, we all have this enormous appetite for novelty, but people say what they value from the newspapers is the in-depth analysis and the reporting. They can get the news anywhere. They can get it from Twitter. They can get it from anything that comes through free. They like getting it from TV. They like seeing it, hearing it, receiving a value of a range of ways, but they want somebody to put the pieces together for them. And they'd like that to be coming out about the same time as the news, but they don't want that the very same second. They want the depth and they want the analysis, and they don't know who to trust in terms of the individual content generators. They are still going to the big media outlets. If you look at the figures, the top sites are the search sites, the shopping sites, and the media sites, TV, newspaper sites. New York Times actually has more visitors than Craigslist. And given that Craigslist has eaten most of the newspaper's real business model in classified advertising, the papers ought to be able to maybe deliver that more to pick up on the new devices that will come through, all the new ways of mining information, having something that is more relevant, and deciding what it is that paper actually does for us, that we still like after thousands of years. Everybody here, I guarantee, has something on paper with them that they care about reading.
Mary, thank you very much. We could go on, but the clock's against us a bit. Troy.
Yes. So the Vlingo's focus is obviously speech recognition, and this speech recognition and the hope for it has been around for over a decade now. Last year we came to market with what we would consider revolutionary technology, which allows for unconstrained speech recognition. And so primarily for computing devices, but really focused on mobile devices. And the vision for that is quite wide-ranging. On the high end, you can see the productivity enhancements. We believe that actually the user interface is really the last barrier to mobile data adoption and productivity in general. So we've already heard today talks about the processing power that is available on devices. We've talked about screen enhancements and the future of that. We've talked about the broad availability of bandwidth. So really the last barrier in our view is the user interface. And we believe speech specifically, but also more generally just the human-to-machine interface is really where we can see a big jump in productivity.
Are we getting near a situation where voices really are recognized by machines infallibly?
Infallibly, no, but quite a lot better, and to the point where the misrecognition are able to be overcome with the right user interface to where it becomes more efficient than typing and or safer than typing in a lot of cases. So there's also a big public policy tsunami coming for things like driving while texting and other issues like that. Now, on the low end of the vision, maybe this is the wrong word, but there is the applicability in emerging markets. And so we have customers and partners, device manufacturers, who are looking at how does speech help them in emerging markets. For example, how do we drive the cost of a mobile handset down to its bare minimum? Well, one of the ways you can do that is get rid of the screen. And therefore, you have a speech recognition interface two-way to help drive the sort of communication that they want to get done. Another very good example is for the illiterate. One of the ways in some countries that you apply for a job is with a text message. Now, someone who can't spell can't participate in that opportunity. Or if they're in a job where people are texting back and forth as part of their work habits, someone who's literate can't participate in that. But speech recognition, properly done, can actually bring those folks into the mainstream.
Generally, I can see why you might want it in some circumstances. I hate it personally. I mean, I hate those machines that talk to me from banks.
Fair enough.
And I'm wondering whether actually it's a fancy idea, which is too fancy for its own good, and actually we should limit its use a lot more. Is it technology which is starting to rule us a bit?
What we would say, and what I personally believe, and I think in general the industry would say, is if you're using speech as an in and of itself, I think you're probably right. But if it's used in the concept of a not to sound cliché, but a multimodal experience, right? So you're using speech where speech is appropriate, you're using screens where screens are appropriate, touch screens when that's appropriate, and even keyboards when that's appropriate. If you're doing that in the right way, and you build the right user interface, it can be an advantage, not a hindrance.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bright, tell me about the problem of counterfeit medicines in your part of the world, in Ghana, West Africa, and tell me what you're doing about it.
Okay, to do that, I think I should situate it in a much broader context.
Sure.
And one of the things I want to talk about in relation to that was about the digital divide and what doing mobile innovation in Africa has taught me about the digital divide. For a long time, if you looked at it in quantitative terms, so the access to bandwidth that a particular region or locality has is used as a function to measure the digital divide. In actual fact, there's a qualitative dimension to that, which, as I explained, working in mobiles in Africa opens your eye to. So when you take a country like Malawi, for instance, where sending 10 SMS a day, for people, a third of the population, that would mean bankruptcy. Because the cost of 10 SMS a day, 10 text messages a day, is equivalent to your total daily income. So when you live in a society like that, your conception of connectivity is no longer quantitative, it's qualitative.
Sure.
So what we've seen is that the kind of services that are coming out of Africa, and you mentioned my own anti-counterfeiting project, is situated in that same context. So looking at the situation in the world where currently, when you look at brands and the way we communicate, and you look at what I call the Walmart world, in comparison with the Twitter world, where all the digital products that you can access are infinitely customizable. Whereas almost all the products you can get in the physical markets, in your Walmart grocery, are almost non-personalizable. The difference is that as the world changes, you start with critical products like medicines, where not being able to tell simply from the outer coating or the outer packaging that this medicine is coming from the right source could kill you. So in my part of the world, for instance, a third of the medicines that you buy, 30%, could actually do grave damage to your system.
Because it's a counterfeit made by a paint manufacturer or some sort of rogue in some back garage.
Exactly.
Go
so
on.
It's a knockoff.
Yeah.
It looks like a real tin, and unlike biscuits, medicines are a type of product that very few of us have a relationship to. We don't know the smell. We don't really care very much. You put water in your mouth and then you throw it down as quickly as you can.
Sure.
So very few of us are able to detect. And don't forget that these people who are doing the counterfeiting are extremely sophisticated. And they have access to the same AutoCAD devices that the manufacturers have. But they are not bearing the marketing cost. They're not bearing the legal cost and the rest of it. So they can still sell cheaply to the market, even if they are not doing, when they are not dealing at the same volume. But if they have 30% of the market, then clearly you have a challenge that is fundamental. And I situate that, as I explained earlier, in the way that in the digital markets, so you have your Twitter product, you have your Facebook product, you can customize it any way you want. But when it comes to the physical world, when it comes to the grocery world, the Walmart world, we still have to take the manufacturer's word for it. You have to take the brand maker's word for it. And that is going to change because 5,000 years of commercial history brought us down that route.
But I want you to get a bit more basic, a bit more. Basically, the problem is that 30% of the medicines, in quotes, in your part of the world, are fake.
Yes.
They look the same, but they don't do the job. They're made of chalk or anything.
Or anything. And they carry the brand marks.
So how are you using text messaging
Yes.
to counter that?
Okay. So what we've done is that we've spoken to the manufacturers, and we've started a piloting program where they put on unique codes, a completely random but unique code to the physical item.
Numbers. Sequences of numbers.
Sequence of numbers, or alphanumeric characters. But they are unique to the physical bottle or physical pack. So when you buy the medicine, you scratch it, then you send it in a text message or in USSD, depending on what service you're using, but in a simple text message, for instance, for free. So it goes to a database, a central registry, and then you get information about that product back to you. That indicates that this is the original medicine or the original product that you bought.
Right, so I've got this bottle.
Exactly.
I scrape off the number.
Yes.
I text that number, and it comes back within 2 seconds and says it's a counterfeit or it's not.
Yes, it tells you that you just bought this particular. It tells you what brand you've bought, what is the expiry date. Because one of the other challenges you have is people fudge the expiry dates. And then it tells you whether you've got a genuine thing or not.
Right. And you're trying it out.
We're trying it out in Ghana. Yes, and we've also now started relationships in Rwanda, and Nigeria, and India, of all places, to roll this out.
I can imagine that the problem will be that the companies, the legit pharmaceutical companies, will say sticking numbers on boxes is going to cost us money.
That is, conceivably, that is the first thing that comes to mind. However, in actual fact, if you're losing 20% of your market to counterfeiters, that is a huge amount of money that's going down the drain. And if you implement this simple solution, one, you recoup that market. So the price of medicines will actually fall. But even more fundamentally than that, this is the first time in the history of the commercial world where somebody is standing right there at the pharmacy and is buying your product and is telling you I'm buying your product. So what are you going to send in the response? Only that it's a genuine medicine or some message that is suited to the person standing right there at the pharmacy.
An advert.
An advert, maybe. But also, you know exactly where he or she is standing. So you know which part of the territory it's coming from. You know what time of the day. You know what combinations work. You know what messaging that you sent, what adverts that rolled out on the television the night before. Did it increase the sale of this particular brand or not? So the kind of information that you get as a manufacturer far supersedes the cost of implementing a very simple, basic intervention in your factory line. But then obviously, as I explained to you, maybe in the future, people are actually going to customize their products. So I'm going to go online, and I'll tell you what kind of shirt I need. And the ability for you to deliver that shirt to me in whatever manner would determine whether your brand is at the cutting edge and not the fact that you put Rolex on the watch.
Thank you very much. Well, we've 14 seconds to go, so I thank you all very, very much indeed for being so interesting.
Thank you.